mother and her son in 1925. Experts analyzed the photo and were left speechless. Dr. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her reading glasses as she carefully examined the contents of the donated estate collection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Among the dusty boxes of documents and memorabilia from the Henderson family of Chicago, one photograph caught her attention. The black and white image, dated 1925, showed a well-dressed woman in her 30s standing beside a boy of perhaps 12 years old. They posed formally in front of what appeared to be a modest Chicago brownstone, both wearing their finest clothes. What struck Sarah immediately wasn't the subjects themselves, but something peculiar in the background. Behind the mother's left shoulder, barely visible in the window of the house, was a reflection that seemed oddly out of place for the era. She reached for her magnifying glass, her heart beginning to race as she focused on the mysterious detail. The image quality was remarkably sharp for a 1925 photograph. As she studied it more closely, she noticed the boy's hand positioning seemed deliberately placed over something on his jacket. "This can't be right," Sarah whispered to herself, her breath catching as she realized what she might be seeing. The photograph that had seemed ordinary moments before was beginning to reveal secrets that could rewrite everything known about this family. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she positioned the photograph under the museum's high-powered digital microscope. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about photography in the 1920s. Reflection in the window behind the mother showed what appeared to be an impossibly clear image of someone taking the photograph, but the camera visible in the reflection was far too advanced for 1925 technology. Even more intriguing was the boy's jacket. Under magnification, Sarah could see that his small hand was carefully concealing what looked like a small metallic object pinned to his lapel. The object had markings that were barely visible, but seemed to contain symbols that didn't match any known badges or pins from that era. The mother's expression, which had seemed pleasant and ordinary at first glance, now appeared strained when examined closely. Her eyes held an attention that suggested she was hiding something significant. Sarah picked up the phone to call her colleague, Professor James Rodriguez, a specialist in early 20th century American photography. "James, I need you to come to the lab immediately. I found something that doesn't make sense." She waited for him to arrive. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this simple family portrait was about to unlock a mystery hidden for nearly a century. Professor Rodriguez arrived within the hour, curiosity piqued by Sarah's urgent tone. As he bent over the microscope to examine the photograph, his expression shifted from skeptical interest to genuine bewilderment. "The camera technology visible in this reflection," he said slowly, "shouldn't exist for another 15 years at minimum. And look at the lighting. This photograph shows evidence of flash photography techniques that weren't commercially available until the late 1930s. Sarah pointed to the boy's concealed object. "And there's this. Whatever he's hiding appears to have some kind of encoded markings. I've never seen anything like it from that period." They decided to run the photograph through the museum's advanced imaging software, hoping to enhance the hidden details without damaging the original print. While the computers processed the image, Sarah began researching the Henderson family. The donation paperwork indicated the photograph had belonged to Margaret Henderson, who had passed away at age 97 in 2019. Margaret's granddaughter, Emily Henderson Walsh, had donated the family collection after her grandmother's death. According to the documentation, the woman in the photograph was identified as Mother and Thomas, 1925, in Margaret's handwriting. "We need to contact Emily Henderson Walsh," Sarah told James. "If anyone has answers about this photograph and this family, it would be her. Something tells me this image holds secrets that Margaret took to her grave." Emily Henderson Walsh arrived at the museum 2 days later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. As Sarah showed her the enhanced images, Emily's face went pale. "I never knew Grandma Margaret had this photograph," she whispered, staring at the image of the woman and boy. "But that's not my grandmother in the picture." Sarah and James exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked gently. Emily took a shaky breath. "The woman in this photograph, that's my great-grandmother, Helen Henderson. She disappeared in 1925 when my grandmother, Margaret, was just 14 years old. The family always said Helen abandoned them, but Margaret never believed it. She spent her entire life trying to find out what really happened to her mother." Emily pointed to the boy. "And that must be Thomas, Margaret's younger brother. He disappeared the same day as Helen." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a family portrait. It might be one of the last photographs ever taken of two people who vanished without a trace nearly a century ago, Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret always said there was more to the story. She believed her mother and brother were in some kind of danger, but no one ever listened to her. She kept searching for answers until the day she died. As the enhanced imaging results came back, the mysterious object under Thomas's hand became clearer. It was indeed a small metallic pen, but the symbols etched into it were like nothing any of them had seen before. The markings appeared to be a combination of numbers and geometric shapes arranged in a specific pattern. James immediately recognized it as some form of code. "This isn't decorative," he said, tracing the pattern with his finger on the computer screen. "This is deliberate. Someone wanted this information preserved, but hidden." Sarah contacted Dr. Marcus Webb, a cryptography expert at Georgetown University, sending him high-resolution images of the pen's markings. Meanwhile, Emily shared more family history. Margaret always said her mother, Helen, was involved in something important before she disappeared. Helen worked as a seamstress, but Margaret remembered her staying up late at night, writing letters, and having whispered conversations on the telephone. When Helen and Thomas vanished, all of Helen's personal belongings disappeared to her letters, her photographs, everything. Dr. Webb called back within hours, his excitement palpable over the phone. "The symbols on that pen," he said, "they're consistent with coded communication systems used by women's suffrage organizations and early civil rights groups in the 1920s. But this particular combination, I've never seen anything quite like it. It's more sophisticated than typical activist codes of that era," suggested Helen. "Henderson was involved in something much more organized and potentially dangerous than anyone realized." Dr. Webb's analysis opened an entirely new avenue of investigation. Sarah spent the next week diving into archives of women's suffrage organizations active in Chicago during the 1920s, while women had gained the right to vote in 1920. Many activists continued working underground on civil rights issues, labor rights, and social justice causes that remained controversial and sometimes dangerous. In the Chicago Historical Society archives, Sarah found records of the Silent Sisters, a secretive organization of women who worked to protect activists and their families from threats and violence. The group operated between 1921 and 1927, helping relocate people whose civil rights work had put them in danger. The organization used a complex system of codes and symbols to communicate safely. Emily, meanwhile, had been going through Margaret's personal effects more carefully. In an old jewelry box, she discovered a small piece of paper tucked behind the velvet lining. On it was written, "Helen Henderson, Chicago, 1925, Protection Protocol 7, Thomas Safe." The handwriting was faded, but still legible. When Sarah saw the note, her pulse quickened. Protection Protocol 7 suggested Helen and Thomas hadn't disappeared by choice. They had been relocated for their safety. The photograph might not be evidence of a family portrait, but rather documentation of their last day before entering a protection program. The sophisticated camera technology could be explained. The photograph was taken by someone with access to advanced equipment, perhaps law enforcement or government agents involved in the relocation. Sarah's theory about government involvement led her to contact the National Archives, where she requested access to previously classified documents from the 1920s. What she discovered shocked everyone involved in the investigation. Helen Henderson's name appeared in federal records as an informant who had provided crucial information about organized crime activities in Chicago during the height of Prohibition. The documents revealed that Helen had been working undercover, using her position as a seamstress to gather intelligence on illegal alcohol operations and their connections to corrupt city officials. Her work had been so valuable that when her cover was blown in early 1925, the federal government made the unprecedented decision to relocate both her and her son, Thomas, to protect them from retaliation. The advanced camera equipment visible in the photograph's reflection now made perfect sense. It belonged to federal agents who were documenting Helen and Thomas before their relocation. The photograph was official evidence of their entry into one of the earliest witness protection programs in American history. Emily was stunned by these revelations. So Margaret was right all along, she said, tears streaming down her face. Her mother didn't abandon the family. She was protecting them by leaving. The coded pin Thomas wore contained the coordinates and contact information for their new identities, information that would allow Margaret to find them if she ever cracked the code. But the mystery wasn't solved yet. If Helen and Thomas had been successfully relocated, why had Margaret never been able to find them? And why had this photograph remained hidden for so long? Further investigation revealed the heartbreaking truth about why Margaret never found her mother and brother. The witness protection program of the 1920s was crude and dangerous compared to modern systems. Records from the National Archives showed that Helen and Thomas had been relocated to a small farming community in rural Montana under the names Helen and Thomas Morrison. For 3 years, the relocation seemed successful. Helen worked as a school teacher while Thomas attended the local school and helped on a nearby farm. They maintained no contact with their previous life in Chicago, as required by the program, however. In 1928, tragedy struck. A fire destroyed much of the small Montana town, including the school where Helen worked, and several homes, including the one where Helen and Thomas lived. Local records from that time were incomplete, but witness accounts suggested that Helen died trying to save children from the burning school. Thomas, now 15, disappeared after his mother's funeral. Some accounts suggested he tried to return to Chicago to find Margaret, but he never arrived. Other accounts indicated he might have been taken in by a farming family in a neighboring state. No official records existed to confirm this. The federal agents who had arranged Helen's relocation were reassigned to other cases, and the informal witness protection program was eventually discontinued. Helen and Thomas Morrison's files were classified and forgotten, leaving Margaret to search for Helen and Thomas Henderson, people who no longer officially existed. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Webb discovered additional markings on the photograph that had been invisible to previous analysis. Using ultraviolet imaging, he found faint writing on the back of the photograph in what appeared to be Thomas's handwriting for Margaret. If you find this, look for the teacher in Big Sky Country. The code will lead you home. TH 1925. Emily immediately recognized the significance. Big Sky Country was a nickname for Montana, and Thomas had left his sister a clue about their relocation. Margaret had never seen this message because it was only visible under special lighting. That didn't exist when she was searching for her family. Sarah and Emily decided to follow Thomas's trail to Montana, working with local historians in the town where the 1928 fire occurred. They discovered something remarkable. The local cemetery had a small memorial section for victims of the fire, and among the names was Helen Morrison, beloved teacher, but there was no grave for Thomas. Their research uncovered a local legend about a young man who had arrived in the area in the late 1920s, claiming to be looking for his sister in Chicago. Local families had helped him, and he eventually settled in the area, taking the name Tom Rivers. Tom became a respected member of the community, working as a teacher like his mother and raising a family of his own. The breakthrough came when they found a photograph in the local historical society's collection. 1950 school photograph showing Tom Rivers with his students. Despite 35 years of aging and a different name, Emily could see the resemblance to the 12-year-old boy in the 1925 photograph. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place when Sarah and Emily located Tom Rivers' descendants still living in Montana. Tom had passed away in 1987, but his son, Michael Rivers, was still alive and living on the family ranch. When Emily called Michael and explained who she was, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "My father talked about his sister Margaret his entire life," Michael finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "He never stopped hoping she would find him. He kept that photograph you found hidden in a secret compartment of his desk. He said someday his sister would understand the code and come looking for him." Emily learned that Tom had indeed tried to return to Chicago in 1928 after Helen's death, but he was a 15-year-old boy with no money and no proof of his identity. By the time he could have made the journey, he worried that too much time had passed and that Margaret might have moved on with her life. He made the difficult decision to build a new life in Montana while always hoping Margaret would somehow find him. The most emotional discovery came when Michael showed Emily a box of items his father had kept his entire life. Letters he had written to Margaret but never sent, photographs of his family that he hoped to share with her someday, and a detailed explanation of the code on his pen, written clearly so that Margaret could understand their story if she ever found the 1925 photograph. As Emily held these precious artifacts, she realized that Margaret and Thomas had been searching for each other their entire lives, separated by circumstances beyond their control, but never forgetting their bond. The photograph that had started as a simple family portrait had revealed a story of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable connections between family members. Even across time and distance, Margaret had died just 2 years before Emily would discover the truth. But Emily knew her grandmother would have been overjoyed to learn that Thomas had lived a good life, that he had never forgotten her, and that their mother, Helen, had died a hero, saving children's lives. The photograph, once analyzed by experts, had finally delivered the answers that Margaret had sought for nearly a century.